Welcome to The Pulse, a podcast that dives deep into the biotech stories and features biotech leaders. I'm one of you co-hosts, Fang Xie.
I'm your other co-host, Yosef Baidi. This podcast is brought to you by the Harvard Biotech Club, a student-led, Harvard-affiliated biotech organization which is on a mission to bridge the gap between academia and industry.
Today's guest is Melissa McCracken. Melissa is partner of Nextech Invest, a leading oncology-focused venture capital firm. She is a board member in multiple private and public biotech companies. Melissa is a PhD scientist by training from UCLA with her research on engineered immunity for cancer. He also completed her postdoc fellowship at Stanford University, where she expanded her research in the field of immuno-oncology. Prior to the Nextech, Melissa was a senior associate at the Third Rock Ventures and helped build and launch the Celsius Therapeutics, which is now part of the IPV. Melissa participated in the HBC's international initiative as keynote speaker in 2019 and 2020. We couldn't be more excited to have Melissa on today's show. Welcome to Melissa. Welcome to our show.
Thanks so much for having me. This is great.
Yeah. Could you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Yeah. So I'm Melissa. I'm a partner at Nextech. I am a scientist by training and then came over to the dark side of investing, I guess about a decade ago. I had completed my postdoc, and in that kind of had come to the point where I knew I wasn't ready for an academic career, or I didn't want to do a traditional academic career, and kind of had this aha moment of what was I going to do. And that led me to venture capital, and particularly company creation at first, and now I sit in a more traditional venture capital role, but that's kind of how I got there.
Cool. I was wondering if we could take a little step back. So I know you pursued your PhD. So what kind of got you interested specifically in the field of biomedical research to pursue a PhD?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I grew up in north of LA, and in California there was this interesting loophole that I think most students didn't realize, that you could actually take community college classes for free while you were a high school student. And so I had taken a few extra classes. And my senior year of high school, I actually didn't really have many credits that I needed to complete. And so instead what I did is I did night classes to get essentially an associate's degree in biotechnology. And the reason why our community college had that was because it was the local community where Amgen was, Baxter, Seminus, which became Monsanto's, was there. And there was a little bit of like a biotech hub. And in that lab class, one of the lab classes I was taking, a scientist from Amgen actually came in and ran a experiment with us, and he was kind enough to offer me an internship at Amgen. So I actually started working at Amgen in R&D the summer between high school and college. And for me, at least, it became kind of this North Star of what you could do with a science degree and what it meant, and kind of the work and the impact that you could have. And, I really credit that to starting my undergraduate degree in biochemistry to basically be like, this is where I'm going, and I want to do something in biotech.
That's really cool. Great to get that experience so early in your career. And we see that in your PhD, you had done some work in cancer, specifically with engineered immunity. So kind of what was your interest specifically to go in that field?
Yeah, so I, all through undergrad, I continued to work at Amgen in summer and kind of over Christmas break. And one summer I worked specifically in early oncology discovery, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was so interesting. I loved the target discovery. I loved the target validation. And so I went into my PhD knowing that, at the time, thinking that a PhD would be a launching point for me to go get a scientist role into a biotech after. And when I started my PhD, a few things that I wanted to work with someone who I thought was really incredible, someone I looked up to, and someone who I thought had this kind of translational view. And my PhD advisor was a professor named Owen Whitty. He's brilliant, has done so many incredible things. But one of the things that Owen did is Owen has actually been very translational in the work he's done. And Owen had this larger grant between UCLA and Caltech on, at the time, which was, really groundbreaking science, engineering the immune system. In particular, engineering T cells, right, to carry a transgenic TCR to fight cancer. And I loved it because it taught me about hematopoiesis, and it taught me about cancer, and it taught me about the immune system. And it was also very collaborative across all of these different groups. In fact, I had collaborated with Tony Rebus, who's now actually currently a Nextech Science partner. And it kind of put all the puzzle pieces together for me on how much I liked it.
It's really cool. Yeah. And I think, you had all this experience working at Amgen before and then during your PhD. So you had this great research career already in grad school. So could you tell us a little bit more about your decision to, do a postdoc after, as opposed to going into industry right after grad school?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And, I think part of it is you ideally choose a PhD lab of someone you look up to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as I was in my PhD, I started to think about, could I be someone like Owen? And I really looked up to him. I still do. And I think, you choose people that you would like to emulate their career, right? And have opportunities or create opportunities for yourself similar to that. And in order to do that, I think you need to do a strong postdoc. And so coming out of my PhD, when I was thinking about my postdoc, there was a few things I wanted to do. I definitely wanted to focus more on immuno-oncology. And there was really interesting work coming out. I kind of had wanted to get away from some of the engineered immunity, but more so look at checkpoint and some of these others. So I was actually kind of weighing the decision to go work with Jim Allison at MD Anderson or with Irv Weissman at Stanford. And Irv is, if you've ever met him, truly one of the most inspirational people ever and just one of the most brilliant people. And Irv was, also knew that I was interested in startups. And at the time, was like, why don't you come work in my lab? You can work on CD47 biology, which is really interesting, kind of bridges the innate and the adaptive immune system. You can also see how a company is being spun from academics out, which is also something you're interested in. And bonus, Jim and I have a collaborative grant. You can work with Jim some too. And I was like, sold, right? And so I went in kind of with a postdoc, actually kind of with the lens saying, I want that academic career that is able to toggle between industry and academics.
That's really cool. It's good to get the best of both worlds when you were deciding between two labs. I was wondering, so you mentioned growing up in LA, like Southern California. Was that something that was interesting to you to go to Northern California, where is a big biotech hub for someone that's interested in going to industry?
I will say, I think I didn't have a full view of kind of what it meant to be in such a concentrated area and why that was important. I had done my undergraduate degree at UC Davis, which is Northern California too. And for my postdoc, I was actually quite flexible on where. Part of me had actually wanted to leave California. I'd always lived in California. Just the opportunity set at Stanford was unmatched, and I just really couldn't turn that down. I think, though, coming out of my postdoc, I make a joke that I think if you leave, in order to leave Stanford, you either have to start a company or join a venture capital group, and I joined a venture capital group.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that segues nicely into our next question, which is, after your postdoc, you were kind of thinking about your next steps. So did you think about becoming a professor, or were you kind of set on going into VC kind of after your postdoc experience? So
I would say VC was not on my radar. I really didn't know what VC was until basically until I decided to join a VC group.
Yeah.
And instead, going into my postdoc, I had really thought I was going to do the academic path. And I had, you guys both having completed PhDs, all the NIH grants. I had the timing worked out on when I was going to submit my K-99 to allow me to have enough time to revise it and then hopefully get it. That would set me up for a better faculty position. And I think being an academic is great. I kind of hit a point where I was like, I don't know if that's what's going to be great for me. And it was kind of a bit scary and a bit, what do I do now? Because I've, been in academics for so long. And again, I think you choose your mentors wisely, and you choose people that, one, care about you and want to develop you, and two, people that you look up to. And so I had conversations with both of my mentors, and both of them were like, how do you think about biotech? And both of them were actually quite active in certain biotechs and had talked about those. And I kind of was like, this feels like a moment that I could take a big step in a different direction and take a bit of risk just in my career and in my life that maybe I wouldn't have at another point. And I decided to kind of lean into that. And during my postdoc, I had done some consulting through some of the KOL networks, the GLGs, the Guide Points, the others. And every time I would do those calls, the people on the other side would be like, I'm so-and-so and I'm a PhD, and I'm so-and-so and I'm an MD PhD. And I was like, how did they get to that seat? Because that's what I'm trying to figure out, and I don't know. And I will say I leveraged my network. I talked to people who had done kind of interesting career moves. I talked to people who knew a bit about startup, and anyone who would give me 30 minutes of their time, I would take an informational interview. And now, a dear friend of mine, but at the time someone who didn't know me, who was just a friend of a friend, was willing to give me 30 minutes of her time. And, I joke with her now that she probably had one of the biggest impacts on my career, and she probably didn't even really remember the call. Mm-hmm. She told me, she was like, your biggest challenge is going to be, you need someone to trust that you're ready to leave the bench, and you just need to do a really good job, and then that's going to parlay into your next role and your next role and your next role. And that really stuck with me. And so what I had done was kind of started to landscape, and Third Rock had kind of come up for a few different ones. I'd seen some of the companies they'd built. They were pulling these incredible academic founders, scientists that I'd been tracking. And I was just really intrigued. And again, I had no real concept of what venture capital was. And so I truly sent an email to info at Third Rock being like, hi, I'm looking for a job. And they were so kind, they wrote me back.
Wow.
Which is pretty incredible. Mm-hmm. And when they wrote me back, I started to interview with them, and they were like, we are hiring an associate, but the role is in Boston. And I was like, okay. And they're like, okay, just to clarify, it's not in San Francisco, it's in Boston. And I was like, let's do it. That sounds great. And I think, for me, it felt like there was a moment in time where I could kind of lean into trying something different, knowing that I was comfortable closing that academic door, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. and feeling like I could take a risk and see if I liked something that took a lot of my science skill set but applied it in a different way. And if I didn't, I would figure out what plan B was.
Yeah. It's really cool. Yeah, I think it's always a big jump to go from being a scientist, being in the lab, to doing something different, and it's really scary. So it's cool to see you were able to do that at that point in your career.
Yeah. So you had worked at the companies and interns at Amgen, at other pharma companies, but why did you think going VC is maybe it's a better idea? Yeah. Have you any idea? Think about that in some moment. Because you have a lot of scientific skills, definitely is good fit for the big pharma. Yeah.
Yeah. So I knew I wanted to understand the business of biotech. And then to put a few brackets on it, I knew that I didn't want to spend any more time on a university campus. Mm-hmm. I just was like, I did my PhD, I did my postdoc, the idea of doing an MBA just felt really daunting to me, and I was like, I just want real skills. I want to go and do it. And I will say, you don't know what you don't know. And so I had this opportunity to join Third Rock, and I felt like if I don't go into venture capital right now, I'll never get in. And now I think I realize, having sat on the other side, people enter in at all different times, and there's no one path and there's no one right way of training. But in that moment, you have no real visibility into how this industry works on this side. And one of the reasons that had kind of drawn me to it and thinking about it was I wanted to learn what it took to really build a business. And, so many people at Stanford, I think Stanford has this reputation for being this startup haven, and people spin companies out. And I was watching some of my friends do it, and one, maybe I'm just not brave enough. And two, I just kind of looked at it and I was like, it's a highly regulated industry. There's no revenue. It costs a ton of money to develop a drug. It takes so many people. I don't really want to wing it. I want to learn from people who have done it and done it well. And I want to get as much as I can from them to really understand how to build a biotech. And I felt like that was exactly what Third Rock could offer me.
Cool. It's really great to hear. Yep. So you kind of mentioned, it being a big move going from the academic world to VC, and then making the move from California to Boston for moving to Third Rock. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about that experience, going to something completely new, and what are the challenges or kind of the obstacles, and what did you really learn kind of those early days of working at Third Rock?
Yeah. So on the move, I moved in January, which I actually think is a great time to move to Boston because it can only go up.
Yeah.
Right? If you move in the dead of winter, it's just going to keep getting better. But one of the things I will say is I think the biotech community and the ecosystem here is unlike anywhere else. The concentration, how small it is in some ways that you can literally walk down the street and see someone else. There's not really another community that matches that. There is a lot of biotech in San Francisco as well. There is something really magical about Boston. I also think there's something, really special about coming into a place like Third Rock that thinks of these incredible big ideas and then truly builds the ideas around it, right? Like they find the right academic founders, they find the right scientists. You have people working around you are industry veterans who have done this for 10, 20, 30 years. I felt really privileged. I got to work very closely with Alexis Borisy and Christoph Langauer, so two incredible people in the industry. And, the mentoring, the training, the ability to work, side by side with them and build a company from kind of idea on paper all the way through launch was, I think, a really special experience and gives me a very unique vantage point, I think, in my role now of understanding what it takes.
Yeah, that's really cool here, and definitely touches upon the greatness of like being in Boston and like the density of like people in biotech, and whether it's VC or industry.
Yeah, just to clarify, you just after your postdoc, you started with entry-level position at a Third Rock and then promoted it to the senior, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and at a Third Rock, you were involved in the Celsius Therapeutics, so which is now merged by AbbVie. Could you tell us about the origin of this company and what it was like to build it? And
so I was really lucky in that, Third Rock has kind of development stage of kind of idea, and they kind of go through this process. You start to slowly bring more and more people on, and this was really anchored around Aviv Regev, who at the time was still at the Broad, and Alexis and Christoph were really driving it from the Third Rock side, and I was able to support them as an associate on the project. And a lot of it was around this idea of single cell biology really hadn't been tapped, and the idea that what we had really used for a lot of genomics or sequencing was bulk RNA that, although very informative, especially someone like myself who comes from, immunology and cancer immunology, understands that, soup doesn't necessarily give you the full list of ingredients, right?
yeah.
And Aviv has a really elegant way of, you've probably seen the talk of smoothies and fruits and all of that. But the idea of could you use this for interesting target discovery in immunology and oncology? And then, Aviv was really an anchor point. And then together we brought in additional academic founders who had really interesting views, had kind of taken single cell biology, applied it to some of their research, and really formed Celsius around that.
That's really cool to hear. I think obviously now single cell genomics is huge, but at that time, probably like the obstacles or kind of like the proof of concept to show that it's actually useful compared to bulk probably was like one thing you guys needed to address.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing too is at the time, commercial products for single cell were just coming online, right? Now it's very common, right? 10x is very commercial, and but even just some of the tools and the open software, like Aviv really pioneered a lot of that. She helped put together like the single cell consortium that, I was lucky enough to travel to some of those conferences where it was a huge collaborative effort of, thousands of people around the world really working to make it. And there's a lot of open source data, right? Where people were putting things on there that, maybe you don't have the question that someone else has, but if the data is out there, people can begin to mine things in really interesting ways.
Yeah, and now it's at the point where it's like used to be where it's like labs that did single cell and you'd work with them, but now it's because of the commercialization. It's like any lab theoretically could do it.
Yep. And also, microarrays were a really big thing when I was in grad school. I bet you they don't even do those now.
No.
Because you can do single cell.
Yeah.
But there's just so much information on it. And so I think, it's great now to see that it's become, in some ways, commoditized, right? That most labs can do it now.
Cool. Well, yeah, thank you so much for sharing that story regarding Celsius. And so at this point of your career, you had made the jump to Third Rock, and then you were in Boston, and then you made another big jump working at Nextech Invest, your current company, which was primarily based in Switzerland at the time, and you became a principal. Could you tell us a little bit more about this career decision?
Yeah. It was an interesting one because I was living in Boston, and obviously I live in Boston now. And I think Boston is just a hub and a big ecosystem. I had made the decision that I wanted to be a true quote unquote investor. And I think Third Rock is a fantastic place, but majority of what they do is build companies. And I felt really grateful to learn that skill set and have done that with them. But when I was thinking about my next role, I wanted the ability to have, I guess, a wider breadth of investment ability, meaning that the ability to do, say, Series A or Series B or a crossover round or even a public, or the ability to do an investment in Texas or Seattle or in Europe. And one of the things that really drew me to Nextech was this focus in oncology, which was most of my background in scientific training, but this breadth of ability to invest across stage, across geography. And that really, I think, resonated with me on what I liked and where I wanted to kind of spend my time. The biggest, I would say, hurdle for me was at the time Nextech was strictly based in Zurich. It was a Zurich-based fund, but it was investing, 90+% of its dollars in the U.S. And my husband and I had to make the decision that moving to Zurich made sense for us. And it was a little tough to also be like, we're living in Boston, do we go to Zurich? But ultimately we decided that the opportunity at Nextech and kind of, again, how I felt I aligned with the investment program just made the most sense.
Yeah. So Nextech is like full scale and will be invested from the VC, from the startup or even to the late stage, as you mentioned, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So, the things that Nextech doesn't do is we're not company builders. We have peer groups who do a really, really good job building companies. We love to syndicate with those peer groups. We'll come into the round, but we don't have the team or the capacity to do like a full build de novo the way that others do. Instead, I think where we have a lot more flexibility and where we're able to kind of, I think our edge is that we're able to really invest, whether it be seed, Series A, Series B, crossover, or even public, and instead really evaluate what we think is the most interesting scientific opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for sharing more about kind of like the motivation for moving to Nextech. And I think we were really interested because like Nextech's primarily based in, you said it was Zurich in Switzerland. So Switzerland's obviously a very big biotech hub. And you mentioned kind of Nextech has evolved in different geographies. So could you tell us a little bit more about like what it was like to work in an international company and kind of the experience to get to work in investing companies, in different geographic regions?
Yeah. Switzerland in general is a really incredible place, and Zurich is a very international city, so that some ways felt really good. We've always done a majority of our investments in the U.S., even though we were headquartered, and we still are headquartered in Zurich. I think what I like about Nextech is that we've always taken a very global view, and we run a very international team because of that. And so I think, we try to strip it back to basics and say we just want to invest in the best science and the best teams and not be hung up on geography or stage or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. So what's the difference of the biotech ecosystem in Europe?
Yeah.
Compared to Boston, US, yeah.
So it's changing, and I think in a good way. We've always said there's no shortage of good science in Europe. In fact, there's really, really fantastic institutions and really, really high quality science. I think what was missing in parts of Europe, and you're starting to see it grow, but even frankly parts of the US, is you kind of need that density effect. You need repeat serial entrepreneurs, you need lab space, you kind of need all of it. And I see it in geographies outside of Boston and San Francisco where it's hard to get talent to relocate there. It's hard to do the CapEx to really build out a lab. And so I think some of that was missing in Europe, but the quality of the scientists trained, the quality of the academic research, it's up there, right? And instead now I think what you're seeing larger European VCs raise bigger funds and put more dollars into Europe, which I actually think will have kind of a feed-forward effect, and I think we'll see more and more startups.
It's really good to hear, yeah. I think it's obviously the science and like the scientists, but I think a lot of it's also the cities where they have the infrastructure and like promote the biotech ecosystem too.
Yeah, and you have to get executives, right? This business takes a lot of people and a lot of hands, and you really need leadership to be willing to step up and go over there. And I think, people maybe sometimes overgeneralize and just, think like, oh, Western Europe. But it's actually culturally very different across, right? And, someone may not want to move to the Netherlands, or may not want to move to Switzerland, or may not want to move to the UK. And that's all okay. It's not different than here, right? Where someone living in Boston maybe has no desire to move to the RTP, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long did you live there?
A little
there?
over 2 years.
Oh,
Cool.
Yeah.
So you had made the move for 2 years, and as we kind of mentioned earlier, and you talked about, you're now a partner in Nextech in the Boston location. Could you kind of tell us a little bit more about that kind of career move?
Yeah. I feel very lucky and fortunate that I was promoted to partner when we launched a fund in the end of 21. And as we were launching that fund, we talked about long-term strategy of Nextech and what that would mean. And a big part is we said we're going to need to grow the team. And we do a lot of our investments in the U.S. There's a lot of good talent in the U.S. And at some point, we felt like it would be a bottleneck to only have one office. And so we made the strategic decision to open U.S. offices. And part of that is, there's a firm cultural element of spending time in Zurich, knowing the team, working closely with them, the Nextech culture, and bringing that to the U.S. and also kind of establishing our U.S. presence. And so in early 22, I moved back and helped launch our, Nextech US.
Cool. And I imagine it was very good for you because you had those connections and kind of knew what it was like to start in Boston. So kind of what was like that like to return back to, an ecosystem you'd been in part of?
Yeah, it felt great, right? I mean, I think one of the things I always now tell associates and analysts on our team is, your peer group that you're starting out with across firms, like, get to know those people, become good friends with them, because they're all going to be the ones that move up, that all of a sudden now are partners at firms that you're sharing deals with. And, it was, in some ways, it felt great to like come back to an ecosystem of a group of friends and peers that I already knew and like kind of plug right back in.
Yeah, it's good. It's great to hear. And it's like biotech's such a small world. So I think that's the thing. It's like you never know who you're going to run into again or work with again. Totally.
And at least, I will say there are some skills that transfer across. You had skills of like what it took to build a company, a biotech, that actually those really transfer over to what it takes to build a U.S. office for a venture firm. All the like simple things that I think, how do you do payroll? Where's your office going to be?
Yeah, you start from the one person, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and how big has like the Boston office grown to now?
Yeah, we have 5 full-time people here now, and in 23 we actually opened a small San Francisco office as well.
Wow, amazing. You have covered the east and the coast, east and west, both coasts.
So it's very interesting now because we cover 9 time zones, right?
Mm-hmm.
Between Pacific all the way through Central Europe. And there's basically someone online at Nextech 24 hours a day.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of like, it's a really interesting thing in that someone from San Francisco can send like a note or ask a question, and someone from Zurich can pick it up basically like 2 hours later.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, by the time the person from San Francisco wakes up, they already have it back in their inbox. And Boston is this like interesting in between. So we actually kind of love it.
Yeah.
It's a little chaotic for sure, but I think it actually works really well for us.
Yeah, I guess sometimes it's difficult to like have the overlapping schedules when you have to meet with people, but it's pretty interesting to hear. It's like, yeah, if you send an email, if people take later to respond, they might not respond the next day if they're in the same time zone. But if they're in the different time zone, they wake up and we'll see it.
Yeah. I think, on the scheduling calls and things, you wind up in a lot of ways shifting the hours needed to capture the company that you're working on or whatever. And, a lot of things are anchored to market hours. So Boston's a little bit of a special place in that as well.
Okay, could you share with us a specific area of cancer therapeutics that you are passionate about? I mean, generally speaking. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, it went in a wave and then it felt like it died down again a bit. But I think radiotherapy is something that is just going to keep getting bigger and better over time. And I'm really excited about what that's going to look like over the next, let's call it 10, 15 plus years. In particular, this idea of alpha emitters coming online and what that could mean for patients and just what it could mean for how we deliver radiotherapies and who can access them. So that's something that I think we're just starting to see what it could do.
Are you referring the radioligand?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I guess like some of the issues, like radiotherapy is in like radiation is like it's not very specific. So is there some work in the area where it gets more specific and it's kind of targeting the cancer as opposed to other tissues?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. You know, if you take a historic look, beam radiation works, right? We kind of know if you radiate things, you will actually kill cells because enough double-stranded DNA breaks and the cell just literally cannot survive. And beam radiation works really well, but it only works when you can point it, and there's obviously other complications, but it doesn't work in these like micrometastatic diseases. If you have a targeted radioligand therapy, in theory, you should be able to target all of those tiny little lesions. And I actually think some of these highly metastatic diseases may become some of the best ones for radioligand therapy. What you need, though, is you need a good kind of tumor to healthy tissue target, right? You need that selectivity index. And I think we're starting to see that. And I'm really excited about those. And I think on that, you know, if you have a good, what's called like tumor to kidney ratio, so typically your maximum dose is really dictated by healthy tissue exposure over, say, what the maximum dose would be from normal toxin and normal therapy, right? And I think as we're getting better at targeting and we're understanding the properties of radioligand, you can start to create a better tumor to kidney or tumor to whatever. And obviously, the more dose that you can get into the tumor, the more cell killing that you're going to get. And that's just something that, like, on a basic level, again, lots of double-stranded DNA break will kill a lot of cancer cells. And that, like, it's reasonably simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, there's a very promising area. Their love clinical trial, I think, is ongoing, and hopefully they can get up FDA approved some stage. So I think that's maybe this area. Are you and the Nextech interest in investing in the future, in next 5 years? Yeah,
we've made some investments. I think it's still an area that we're still looking at actively. In general, I would say we try not to be overly prescriptive on exact areas. Instead, we really want to just back, the best teams and the best science. Radioligand therapy is something that I care a lot about, and I think there's going to be a lot of promise, but it's definitely not going to be overweighted in our portfolio in any way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then you also have this background in immuno-oncology, so you kind of talk about not being like pushed or kind of incentivized to go to a certain area, but is that something you're still kind of curious in, or you're looking for companies potentially in that area?
I think yes and no. Immuno-oncology can mean so many things, right? I would say we're hesitant, and never say never, right? You see the right deal and you'll do whatever makes sense, right? If the science is really there to support it. We've done a lot of quote unquote immuno-oncology in a sense of like we've done a few companies that have T-cell engager programs where, again, talking about science that we think is really interesting. I really think that T-cell engagers, there's been a few things that all of a sudden it's like the industry just like clicked and people are like, oh wow, these work. And frankly, they're working in solid tumors in areas that if you would have asked me 3 years ago, 5 years ago, do I think that they would work there? I probably would have been like, I don't know. Prostate cancer, historically considered a cold tumor, not really checkpoint reactive, working really well with T-cell engagers. There's limited evidence in colorectal cancer. That would be massive if we can get T-cell engagers in colorectal cancer. Huge unmet need. Most other current therapies really aren't having an impact. Would love to see kind of an immuno-oncology approach, right? A T-cell engager approach, tackle parts of colorectal cancer.
Yeah, it's really great to hear. And like when you're looking at areas where there's kind of an unmet need or there's not as much kind of activity for it, because if you guys are oncology focused, imagine like a lot of companies might be looking at like the low-hanging fruit, for instance, but there's probably a lot of other cases where there are good areas to invest.
Yeah, as follow-up questions, on top of the radioligand therapy, there are also a lot of, the promising areas is ADC, antibody
Drug conjugates?
Yeah. So what's your takeaways from that? ADC. Do you think that's
We think ADCs are fantastic. We've done quite a few investments in them. Actually, ADCs, radioligand therapies, T-cell engagers, they've all actually had a resurgence, I think, because they've all been around for decades. The first ADC was approved, I looked this up, like 30 years ago, and then it was pulled from the market and it was put back on. And I think, where are the improvements and why are ADCs having such like a moment now? The improvements are, we start to understand way better linker technology. We start to understand how to control the DAR, right, the right payload. And Nextech has done several investments in this space, but we think it's really meaningful. In breast, we're seeing some patients almost in first line getting it, and we're seeing broader tumor types of it being applicable too. Ovarian, I think it's made a really big difference. Elahere, which is the immunogen drug that was actually bought by AbbVie, very rarely do you see drugs beat their launch expectations, and it beat the launch expectations, showing you that people really wanted a targeted therapy and that there just really wasn't something there. And so I think, ADCs, that's one, again, if we have tumor antigens that are clean enough, I think that's one where a high level of toxin, the same way that chemo works, we know will also kill tumor cells. I think the biggest question for us in ADCs is a lot of people now are going to be getting a topo payload ADC because there's a lot that are getting approved and frankly a lot that work well. The question comes, these aren't giving durable, lasting cures. So what next? And I think it's a question of the industry at large and a question of what do you give these patients after? It'd be great if they had another ADC. Right now, I think we don't have a great option. And so that's something that we're definitely looking for. So is lots of other people in the investment community of how do we, what do we give patients next?
Yeah, it's really great to hear. A lot of people are thinking about this important problem, specifically in cancer. You kind of talked earlier about, your trajectory of going from a postdoc and talking to people, learning about VC to get into VC. So we're wondering now, as a partner, could you tell a little bit about, from that experience and what you see now in VC? Could you give advice for people that are interested in getting VC or the biotech ecosystem now, given, the state of the economy and biotech jobs overall?
Yeah. It's rough out there. I think just broadly, the biotech markets have been very, very choppy the last few years. I think that's hard for people trying to break in because there's a lot of unknowns, right? It's a lot easier when everything's up and to the right. I wouldn't say it's impossible. What I will say, though, is that sometimes I meet people who are so fixated on saying they want to be in venture capital without really understanding what the role could be. And I would instead tell people to take a step back and reflect and think, what is it that's driving you towards venture capital that you think you really like? And could you basically scratch that itch some other way? Is it that you love looking at lots of different science and understanding new areas? Could you do that in a search and evaluation role at pharma? Maybe that's a good fit, right? Could you do that in, some other capacity? Figure out what you think is really drawing you to it and then see what you can do. What I worry about is I talk to some people who feel very prescriptive on I need to do items A, B, C, and D, and that's going to get me into venture. And I'm it could, for sure, maybe, but there's no guarantee. And so make sure that you are engaged and interested and actually want to do things A, B, C, and D. Or otherwise just I think back to the comment of that call of, someone just needs to give you a chance and then do a really good job and you can parlay that into the next thing and the next thing. Maybe venture is on that path, maybe it's not. There's so many ways to work in the biotech ecosystem that I would say don't get so hung up on a specific title.
Yeah, I think, us as trainers right now, we hear a lot of people interested in VC want to do a fellowship at a big VC firm. But from your experience and other people, it's having equivalent kind of experiences in other biotech jobs seems also to be helpful as well, right?
Totally. I think just the more you can understand about how the industry works, the more you can build your network, the more that you just get a view into where you could be useful, where your skills could apply. It all will help.
Yeah. Actually, because we have time, I think we talk about about AI, how the AI will impact in the VC. And we know there are a lot of like AI can do a good job. Maybe now it's not very perfect, but in the future maybe can do streamline like due diligence deal, sourcing, landscaping. Do you think that will be replace some like AI jobs like associate analyst? I mean for the entry level jobs. Yeah.
So it's a really good question. I had done there's a venture fellowship called the Kaufman Fellow that I'd done a few years ago that you have a cohort you become really close with, and we still all talk almost daily. And people are like, man, AI, like, it could almost replace analysts, like the note-taking skills, the questions, like they can like run it down. It's pretty incredible, and that's great. I think in venture, at least the way I see it, and this is my opinion, is it is so much of an apprenticeship business. And the longer you've been in it, the more that you've seen, the more that you can help and support your companies. And that can't be trained by AI. So I see it as a tool in our toolbox that we'll be using, at least inside. I hope it doesn't take away kind of core jobs, because I think it's important for us to find, develop, and train the next group of investing partners in biotech.
It's really great to hear. And like speaking on like kind of training and giving advice to the next investment partners, we know from our intro you had participated in a talk for an international initiative for the Harvard Biotech Club. So we're wondering, like, is this something you kind of commonly have done, being able to speak out to students, postdocs, trainees in general, to talk a little bit more about your work?
When people invite me, I'm happy to. The Harvard one, it was actually a lot of fun. Thilo and I did it together. Thilo is the investment partner in Zurich. And I think it was a great perspective on being in Europe, investing in the US, maybe what we do differently. Because what I will say is that every venture firm operates very differently, just how they think about deals, how they think about team, how they think about investments. And it's one of the things that I think makes our industry very successful is that it's not cookie cutter, right? Everyone has a nuanced view and everyone does things a little different. And so doing that talk for the Harvard Biotech Club, it was great for Thilo and I to kind of share how Nextech thinks about things and, what we like to do.
Yeah, that was really great. Fung can attest that it was great since he had attended. So I think like we definitely would love to have you back again for the next initiative, because it's always good to get the people with the different perspectives, like working abroad versus in the U.S. as well. And then we also want to ask, just because as a partner, we imagine you're very busy with work. So could you tell us a little bit more about how you maintain the work-life balance, with your current position?
What difference from, this role from your previous role, like principal and senior associate? What's different?
Yeah, so it's definitely firm specific, I will say. So I think the role at Third Rock was just different because the way that we invested was different. We did a lot more company building, company creation. So it was just a different, kind of how I spent my day was different. I think for me at least, the promotion to principal and also joining Nextech, the way that I would talk about it is that to be a principal, I think there's an expectation that you can source deals, you can lead a deal, you can run the deal all the way through diligence, you can negotiate it, and then ideally you can be the representative for the firm on the board. And, that's the way that we think about it. And we feel very confident in the skills of our principals here that they can be the Nextech representative, that they have the ability to, be out there, leverage their network, find the best deals, run those deals down, and then represent Nextech as the investment director. And, that actually stays the same as you become a partner. I think you probably just have more responsibility and more boards as that goes. And, maybe you've done it a few more times. But, we try to run a reasonably flat firm where, everyone kind of has a decent voice around the table and everyone can really contribute across deals. We also try to run deal teams across offices, across levels. So that way you're getting kind of a mixed view of, all of the diligence, all of the questions. Because I think it's easy for one person to maybe get a bit biased, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that sounds great from both. I imagine as like an associate, it's great to kind of get that independence and be able to talk to principals and partners like yourself. I imagine it's great as like a partner too. You still get to see kind of go into the weeds and see what people are doing, because I imagine it's something you're still really interested in.
Very much, yeah. I think it's a lot of the diligence. I mean, part of what makes this job so fun is you are constantly learning, and you get to interact with truly like the smartest people in the world. You get these people who are just so driven and so creative and are building these really unique companies, and you get to be some small part of it.
It's really great to hear. And then one thing we always like to ask in the podcast, we want to learn a little bit more about our guests other than, their goals and, what they do as a scientist. So could you tell us a little bit more about your hobbies outside of work?
Yeah. So I have 2 young kids. Those are basically my hobbies right now. My son is almost 4 and my daughter's 1.5. And, right now I think they are definitely the focus of where I spend a lot of time. Outside of that, I'm very lucky to have family in California. I like to try to go see family when I can. And I like to do yoga. Those are kind of my hobbies.
It's meditation.
Yeah.
Sort of like,
Yeah. And then you kind of mentioned initially, like, you still have family in California. When you were in California, you wanted to get out. So do you, like, miss California a lot, or do you really like Boston?
There's nowhere better in the world to be in biotech besides Boston. And Boston has so many great things about work and biotech in the community. I think it's also like a great place to raise kids. I miss California when I go to a board meeting in San Diego in February, and I know what the weather is in Boston. But for the most part, I feel really lucky to be here and kind of be part of the ecosystem here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And like you said, when you first moved here, January is the worst, but like it gets better after. So
yeah, but that like hint of spring, and you're like, oh, it's great here.
Yeah, it was really great. Well,
it's great. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank Melissa for taking the time in her day to be on our podcast for the interview, and also sharing a little bit more about your career trajectory, because I think a lot of people are really interested in VC and would like to hear from someone as a partner to hear how they got into VC and how they made it up the hierarchy.
It's great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. That's the end of this episode for the Harvard Griffin GSAS Biotech Club's The Pulse Podcast. I want to thank Fung for helping co-host, as well as thank Fung and Rui Lee for helping produce this episode. And I want to thank everyone for listening, and please stay tuned for our next episode with Bill Sellers, Director of the Cancer Program at the Broad Institute and Professor of Medicine at Dana-Farber and Harvard Medical School.